I've been told. I've been told it's game week, and the college football season of 2026 is upon us. Week 0, 9-game slate coming up on Saturday, and it all starts off in Dublin, Ireland. Yeah, that's the truth. TCU in North Carolina, 11 a.m. on Saturday. We finally have games to talk about. But before we get to the games at hand, we do have some news. We have some controversy. Uh, it's been the topic of conversation. I've seen the news about NFL players coming back to college. Touched on it on the last show, but gonna get to it tonight as well because it's been talked about today. So I have some more thoughts to get to. There have been several high-profile quarterback jobs that have been won that have been announced today. I'm going to touch on those. I told you after I did my first college football playoff predictions, I said that there would be a second, and I'm going to reveal those tonight. My final college football playoff predictions 2.0 to be exact. Those will be revealed on tonight's show, and more fall camp intel to round out a jam-packed show on a Monday. Nonetheless, a Monday night, I told you we're bumping this thing up to 3 times a week. We're live Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 7 p.m. Connor Newt hosts the 6 on 102.5 The Game. He'll lead us right into the air raid at 7 o'clock. So 3 shows a week, every week throughout the 2026 college football season, and I couldn't be more excited. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel if you're not already. You can search me, my personal YouTube, The Air Raid with Parker Kelley. Hit the subscribe button. Doesn't sign you up for anything. Doesn't ask for your email. You don't have to pay. It's free, but it really helps out the show. And while you're at it, just subscribe to the 102.5 The Game YouTube as well because, this is a show built for you, built for college football fans, and we just want as many college football fans to see this podcast, this live show as possible. So make sure that you're subscribed. And if you don't know entirely 100% sure if you're subscribed or not, just go ahead and double check. But that's enough of my begging. As I told you at the start, a lot to get to. Let's just dive right in. Several high-profile quarterback jobs have been won today. It is that time of year. Some teams will be playing on Saturday in week 0. Most of the country will be playing the following Saturday. So that is why we're seeing all this information come to light. Let's start with Alabama. So Alabama, over the weekend, it wasn't today, but over the weekend, they announced that Keelan Russell was going to be their starting quarterback for the 2026 season. He's a 6'3", 207-pound sophomore out of the Dallas, Texas area, was a 5-star coming out of high school, Elite 11 MVP. Some services had him as the number 2 quarterback in the class. Some services had him as the number 2 overall recruit in his recruiting class. Let me just be very clear about this kid. One, if you've been listening to the show, you know that we've been talking about this. And I said from the very beginning of this show, a little over a month ago, that I believe Keelan Russell was going to win this job. Now, it would be close because Austin Mack is still a very talented quarterback, and this is no indictment on Austin Mack whatsoever. But Keelan Russell, at least from what I've been hearing out of fall camp in Tuscaloosa and even in spring ball, Keelan Russell possesses the rare characteristic, the rare trait to, when a play breaks down, is able to make something out of nothing. Now, we call that making out-of-structure plays. Keelan Russell's certainly very gifted in that area, very rare at that. And he also possesses the physical ability to do things that many people at his age simply can't do. Now, again, I don't want this to come across as some sort of indictment on Austin Mack, who is the backup QB2. He's been with Kalen DeBoer for the last 4 years. Was at Washington. With him was the backup to Michael Penix, followed him to Alabama when Kalen DeBoer took the job, and he's been with him ever since. Now, he's been involved in several tight quarterback races. Last year, battled with Ty Simpson, but Ty Simpson won that job pretty early on, battled with Keelan Russell. here's my belief about Austin Mack. The first thing I'll say is Alabama probably has the best quarterback room in the country, certainly the best 1-2 on the depth chart in the country. I feel very comfortable, very confident saying that, because even if Austin Mack did win this job, regardless of who won, I would feel really good about that position overall. If it was Keelan Russell, which I feel a little bit better that it's Keelan Russell, but even if it was Austin Mack, I would still feel good. Now, Austin Mack is technically a senior this year, but with the passing of the 5 for 5 years to play 5 years in college football, Austin Mack is going to have another year of college football after this. Now, if Keelan Russell lights it up, which I expect him to do so, Austin Mack is more than likely not going to be a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide next year. And if he's in the portal, I think it'll be a lucky day for whoever is able to land him. But I do see Austin Mack being a starter at some point. But to get to Keelan Russell, is just as gifted of an athlete as they come at the quarterback position, possesses rare traits that people his age, again, I don't even think he's 20 years old, just possesses the ability to be able to do something that not a lot of kids his age can do. But that was announced over the weekend. And to make matters a little bit easier for Keelan Russell, if you look at Alabama's schedule, now we know that teams in the SEC, they moved to a 9-game conference schedule, plus you add on the 10th game where they play a team in the Power 4 outside of the SEC. So you look at Alabama's schedule compared to other teams, compared to Texas, compared to Oklahoma, compared to Tennessee. And Alabama has a lot easier schedule compared to some of those other teams. Now, it's not easy, but it's a lot easier. So that'll make the transition process for Keelan Russell a lot smoother. So he has that going for him. But as far as what else there is on the offensive side of the ball for Alabama, the wide receiver room, they have Ryan Coleman-Williams returning, but he had a down year after having a fantastic freshman season. I believe he was 17 years old during that season. Will he be able to get back to what he was as a freshman? I think a lot of the issue with Ryan Coleman-Williams last year didn't have anything to do with his physical ability. I think it had everything to do with the neck up. Mentally, I don't know if he was in the best state to reach his fullest potential last year. Does he round into form of what he was as a freshman in 2026? Latsier Brooks, who was a freshman wide receiver for them last year, was great for him, I thought. He's back. But for that wide receiver 3, I believe it's going to be Rico Scott. Derek Meadows is another name that I'm really high on. He's going to be a sophomore this year, was a very high-profile recruit coming out of high school. Cedarian Morgan, a true freshman, a guy that I've been hearing his name kind of mentioned when you put your ear to the ground. That's a name that I've been hearing out of Tuscaloosa. Will Alabama be able to run the ball a lot better than they were last year? Last year, outside of, if you're looking at that offensive line unit, they had Caden Proctor at left tackle. They had Parker Brailsford at center, both of whom were drafted in the NFL draft last cycle. They have to replace all 5 on the offensive line this year. And when you couple that with they were really bad at running the football last year, I was looking at stats from 2025 for Alabama. Collectively as a team, they ran for a little over 1,500 yards. The leading rusher was Jam Miller, who had 504 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it was not a great situation for Alabama running the football. Now, that should never be the case, especially at a school like Alabama. If they're able to improve in that, you don't have to jump into the top 10, let's say, this year. But if you improve, that takes a lot of pressure off of a more inexperienced but talented quarterback in Keelan Russell. So at Tennessee, in Knoxville, Josh Heupel came out today, early this morning, and said something that we have also been saying on the show, or at least we believed that this was going to happen. Faison Brandon has been named the starter in Knoxville for the Tennessee Volunteers, a true freshman, beat out redshirt freshman George McIntyre for the job. Now, I do have a really cool story about Faison Brandon because I was fortunate enough a couple years ago to go on a recruiting visit at Tennessee, and I actually spent a good amount of time with Faison. And I remember Faison showing me a video of him in high school doing a windmill dunk. Now, he probably was a junior in high school at the time. And the dunk may have been from his sophomore year, but Faison, from a physical perspective, was much more advanced than George McIntyre. Physically, Faison Brandon looked like he was a junior in college already by the time he stepped on campus. Now, that's only been expedited a little bit with the hiring of Derek Owings, the strength coach in Indiana last year. He's now in Knoxville. I've talked about that move, how it's one of the more not underrated, but not talked about enough hires of the offseason. And he's not necessarily on the coaching staff, but strength coaches have almost as big of an impact as the head coach. And Derek Owings, what he was able to accomplish in Indiana last year, the things that you've been hearing out of Knoxville with all the players that are putting on muscle, large part of that is due to Derek Owings. So he helps Faison Brandon add a little bit more muscle to an already a pretty good frame. But for George McIntyre, the guy that he was battling against, the constant negative that you were hearing about George McIntyre was, one, he didn't really take this job by the horns, despite theoretically having the leg up in the competition. But two, from a physical perspective, he's a tall guy, but he's still really scrawny. And you would hear reports about, oh, George McIntyre may have put on 5 to 10 pounds, but you couldn't really tell. And I believe that may have had a role in when Josh Heupel decided this quarterback, who's going to be QB1 for Tennessee this fall. If you think about what Josh Heupel asks of his quarterbacks, one, you have to be able to throw the ball vertically down the field. That's obviously a big part of their offense. But two, there has to be a mobility aspect for the quarterback position. And Faison and George are both very athletic, capable runners. But George McIntyre, just looking at his scrawny frame, if you were to ask him to run the football versus SEC competition, he might get snapped in half. So Faison Brandon, you don't have to worry about him getting snapped in half if he were to tuck the ball and run, which, again, is part of this Josh Heupel offense, and he asks his quarterbacks to do so. And the thing that really impressed me most about Faison Brandon were the reports that you heard. He never left campus over the summer to go back home. He stayed on campus, was constantly in the weight room, was constantly watching video, watching film, watching tape, was out on the practice field, going through different game type scenarios in his mind. He was always working. And I want to backtrack a little bit. George McIntyre, really the only experience that he has in college is garbage time reps. He was the third string quarterback last year, but he still was in this system for a year. So theoretically, going into this, if I were to take you back to pre-spring, George McIntyre theoretically had the leg up, just given that he had more time on task in the system without having the actual game type reps. But when it got down to it, the reports that you heard over the last couple of weeks before the starter was announced was, hey, sounds like Faison Brandon's the guy. Sounds like he's really taking this job, taking the bull by the horns, and that was evident. And heard nothing but good things about the work ethic, about his desire to compete, his desire to win that job and to leave no doubt. And Josh Heupel, when he spoke to the media today, reflected that same sentiment. So that's a plus coming out of Knoxville, announcing Faison Brandon as the starter over there. And then for Florida, they announced that Aaron Philo was going to be their starting quarterback as well, that he beat out Tramell Jones. Also, I thought this is where they were going to go all along. Aaron Philo, a transfer from Georgia Tech, follows offensive coordinator Buster Faulkner over from Georgia Tech. Got a little bit of play time last year, but obviously Georgia Tech had Haynes King, so Haynes King was the primary option, but they still had packages for Aaron Philo. Aaron Philo, a very talented kid, but kind of like what we were talking about with Faison Brandon is walking into a really good situation at Tennessee with the roster that they have assembled around him. Aaron Philo at Florida is also walking into a good situation, at least from an offensive perspective. Now, Florida, I don't have Florida making the playoffs or anything. I don't think Florida is a playoff contender, national championship contender, anything like that. But I've been on the record of saying that I believe Florida has a top 25 roster in college football. And I'm just going to focus on the offense because that's what we're talking about here. But if you look at their receiver room, right, you have Vernell Brown, who was fantastic for him last year. You have Dallas Wilson, who was a 5-star coming out of high school, who was also fantastic for him at times last year. And then Eric Singleton, a transfer from Auburn at receiver, who prior to Auburn was at Georgia Tech with Buster Faulkner. So he already knows the system. Eric Singleton kind of disappeared last year just because things went haywire at Auburn. But Eric Singleton is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the country. And I think that'll show this year. And then you look at who they have at running back, Jaden Ball, who I believe to be one of the better running backs in the SEC, but he often gets overshadowed by guys like Keewan Lacey and Ahmad Hardy. But Jaden Ball is one of the better running backs in the SEC. So if you look at the weapons that Aaron Philo is going to have around him, really all he needs to do is just be a point guard. Just distribute the football and don't put the ball in harm's way, a.k.a. be a game manager. And game manager is a term that gets a really bad rap for whatever reason, has a negative connotation attached to it. But I don't view it that way. In fact, I view it as a compliment because there are really good game managers at quarterback who have won a lot of football games. And that's all Aaron Philo has to be. He just has to be a game manager, get the ball in the hands of your playmakers, don't try to do too much, don't put the ball in harm's way, and Florida can have some success on offense. And over at Arkansas, really, I mean, this is an SEC segment because we're just talking about SEC QB1 battles or quarterback battles that have been won. But Arkansas has named sophomore quarterback KJ Jackson as their quarterback one. He beat out Memphis transfer A.J. Hill. And if you know Ryan Silverfield, who's now the head coach at Arkansas, came over from Memphis, brought over one of his guys, and KJ Jackson still won the job. I also expected this to happen. Now, I'm not going to sit here and glow about KJ Jackson like I have some of the other guys. It's going to be a really rough year for Arkansas, but that was just in the news today. So quarterback jobs are being won. They're being announced. It was a really big deal. I alluded to this. A couple of weeks ago, I did my first college football playoff predictions, 1.0. And I said at the tail end of the segment that I was going to release a version 2.0, which would be my final predictions. And I was going to do that in a couple of weeks. Well, as I stack the papers here, the time has come. My college football playoff predictions 2.0, this will be my final playoff predictions. There are some changes that are made. Not many changes. I still have the same teams, just a little bit of a different order compared to the last time we did this. So let's just go 1 through 12. My 1 through 12. Number 1, I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That hasn't changed. At number 2, there is a change. I have Oregon. And presumably, Oregon being this high and being in the Big Ten, this would mean that I have Oregon winning the Big Ten championship if they're going to be number 2 in my college football playoff seeding here. At number 3, I have Miami. I've been going through Miami's schedule. I've been, I did a segment about some fall camp intel from Miami on the last show. As I go throughout their schedule, really the only blemish that I see is when they have to travel to South Bend to take on Notre Dame on November 7th. Outside of that, I firmly believe that Miami should win every other game on their schedule, including the ACC championship game, which, by the way, since joining the ACC, they have not won the conference. So that would be a really big deal. But if Miami's only loss is to Notre Dame and they win the ACC, then I have them slotted at number 3. At number 4, I have Texas, my SEC champ. Texas has had a Georgia problem, but this is the year I see them beating Georgia in the SEC championship. I believe that roster is way too talented, and I believe there is a championship or bust feel in Austin. So if this is the year that Texas is going to do it, this would be the year. They're my SEC champ. At number 5, I have the Big Ten runner-up, Ohio State. Really went back and forth. Really went through the same 3 teams, Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana, for potential matchups in the Big Ten championship, the Big Ten winner, all that sort of thing. Constantly going through that in my head. But I decided on Oregon being my Big Ten champ. They beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. So Ohio State is your Big Ten runner-up. I have them at number 5. Georgia, they're the SEC runner-up. I have them at 6. At number 7, this is where we get to the Big 12 representation. I have Texas Tech, the winners of the Big 12. I have them beating BYU. So I have Texas Tech at 7. At 8, this is where you get your third Big 10 team, Indiana. Not leaving Indiana out, not doubting Curt Cignetti. I honestly felt really bad putting them this low at number 8. At number 9, I have Ole Miss, third team from the SEC. At number 10, I have LSU, a fourth team from the SEC. I believe the matter of this seeding, if it were to play out this way, whoever gets 9 and 10, that's going to come down to that week 3 matchup between Ole Miss and LSU and Oxford. That's what I believe. So I have Ole Miss at 9. I have LSU at 10. At 11, I have a fourth Big Ten team, and I have not wavered on this. I think USC is going to make the playoff this year. So I have USC at 11, and at number 12, that's where you get your group of 5 team, or your group of 6 team, rather. I have Boise State as the group of 6 representative. And a quick note regarding the college football playoff, this structure, because it changes every year. The highest ranked group of 6 team, regardless of if they're conference champions or not, is getting that group of 6 bid into the playoff. So for Boise State, if you look at the Mountain West favorites, preseason favorites, it's Boise State, and there's a huge gap between them and the next team. And if you look at, the AP poll, for example, there was no group of 6 team ranked in the top 25, but the closest team would have been Boise State, and there was a gap between them and the next closest team. I have Boise State as my group of 6 representatives. So that's my 1 through 12. Let's get to the first round games on campus. My first round game, Ole Miss at Indiana. So that would be your 9 versus your 8. I have Boise State going on the road to Columbus to take on Ohio State in your 5 versus 12. I have LSU as the 10 going on the road to Lubbock, Texas to take on Texas Tech. And then I have USC as the 11 seed going on to take on Georgia in Athens. So really I had USC and Georgia in my first playoff prediction. That hasn't changed. The other 3 matchups have. I have Indiana beating Ole Miss in Bloomington. I have Ohio State beating Boise State in Columbus. I have LSU going on the road and taking down Texas Tech. And then I have Georgia beating USC in Athens. Now, we all agreed, or at least I hope we did, that it's playoff or bust for Lincoln Riley this year at USC. So by getting into the playoffs, Lincoln Riley saved his job, at least for another year. They may not win a game, but if he makes the playoff, I think Lincoln Riley is safe for another year. After all, they did just bring in the number 1 high school recruiting class. So in the quarterfinals, Indiana would advance. They would take on Notre Dame, a matchup a couple of years ago in the first round of the college football playoff. And by the way, these 2 teams were scheduled to do a home and home. That has been canceled, so that's unfortunate. But at least we get it in the quarterfinals, at least in my predictions. Ohio State, they would move on after beating Boise State to take on Texas in the quarterfinals. That is a rematch of a game we will see in week 2 in Austin. I have LSU advancing to take on Oregon, which I had this in my first initial playoff ranking or playoff predictions. I had LSU taking on Oregon in the first round in the 8 versus 9, changed some things around, and now I have them meeting in the quarterfinals. And then I have Georgia advancing to take on Miami. So I have Notre Dame beating Indiana. I have Texas beating Ohio State. I have Oregon taking down LSU. And I have Georgia beating Miami. Your semifinals are set. 2 SEC teams in the semifinals, only 1 Big Ten. Interesting trend considering how the last few years have gone. I have Notre Dame and Texas, which would be a banger of a semifinal. And then I have Oregon taking on Georgia. As badly as I wanted to pick Texas, because I'm really high on this team. I'm really high, at least on paper, the roster that they've assembled. I have Notre Dame beating Texas because I'm that much higher on Notre Dame. And I have Oregon beating Georgia, advancing to their first national title appearance under Dan Lanning. So Notre Dame and Oregon in the national championship game, I have Notre Dame winning. So that has not changed. I have Notre Dame as my preseason number 1. I have them winning the whole thing, wire to wire. I believe it's Notre Dame's year. So Notre Dame beats Oregon in the national championship. Marcus Freeman gets his first ever college football playoff national championship trophy. My college football playoff predictions 2.0. I will put those out on social media after the fact, just in case you weren't able to listen live. You can always go back and listen later by way of podcast. But just in case you want a visible version, I know I wasn't able to put the graphic up here on the show. I'll put that out later. So make sure that you're following me on the socials at Parker_Kelley10 on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, and Instagram. Those will be up on the socials either later tonight or early tomorrow morning. See, I thought we were done with this. I thought we were done with this segment, but it's reared its ugly head once again, and I'm afraid that I have to talk about it. We have NFL players on the surface, it seems, appearing to come back to college football. Again, I talked about this on the last show, and I feel like I got all of my thoughts out, and I'm going to try not to waste too much time on this again, just because we're all sharing a brain on this. We all think it's a load of crap. We all think it's stupid, but I still have to talk about it. So let me just kind of paint the picture. Former Ole Miss tight end Daquan Wright, who was a member of the Cleveland Browns this preseason, he's been released by the team. He has verbally committed to LSU, actually has a deal in place with the school. And basically, in order for this to become official, LSU has to wait for Daquan Wright to clear waivers, because in the NFL, there's this process that if a team releases you in the preseason, another team can pick you up. But if you clear waivers and you don't get picked up by another team, then you're kind of just in no man's land. But in this case, with the ruling in Louisiana State Court a couple of weeks ago that filed a temporary restraining order on behalf of 16 players, Daquan Wright was a part of that 16-member crew. So if he clears waivers, it looks like he's going to go to LSU. And another former Ole Miss player, Xavier Harris, who's a defensive lineman, he's been waived by the New Orleans Saints. Same thing for him. If he clears waivers, he is verbally committed to LSU, and he will be a member of Lane Kiffin's team if he so clears waivers. And that's ironic about Xavier Harris, because Xavier Harris is also the guy that bashed Lane Kiffin on social media. And after the fact, when Lane Kiffin abruptly exited Ole Miss, left them and before their playoff run and went to LSU, Xavier Harris was one of those guys bashing Lane Kiffin. Oh, the irony. Oh, the irony. And then to complete the trifecta here, the Tigers also picked up a commitment from former Notre Dame defensive end Junior Tuihalamaka on Friday. That's a really tough name to pronounce, but I feel pretty confident that I said that right. So not only is Lane Kiffin referred to as the portal king, but it appears that he's also the NFL waiver king as well. 3 guys that were on or were a part of NFL rosters have now verbally committed to playing for the same man. Now, again, we all know this is stupid. We all know that this should never be happening. I hate this. I hate this for the fans. I hate this for myself as a fan of the sport that I'm having to talk about this right now. It's sickening. It appears that college football can't get out of its own way long enough to avoid just this is just common sense. This is so commonsensical that it's laughable that we're even talking about it. So Lane Kiffin he spoke about this at his media availability, and to paraphrase, to summarize here, not quoting exactly, he basically said, if it's legal and it's an avenue for me to help my team, why would I not do that? Ryan Day came out and said a similar thing, the head coach of Ohio State, basically saying like, hey, I may not be for this, but my goal is to help Ohio State win football games. And if this helps us win football games, then I'm going to do it. Now, the other side of this, you have coaches like Dan Lanning at Oregon, who I applaud Dan Lanning for saying this, saying, hey, those NFL guys, they're in the NFL. They shouldn't come back to college, because if I were to bring them back to college and bring them to my roster, well, then that basically kicks somebody else out of a roster spot, which they've worked so hard all spring, all summer to have a spot on the team, and they're just getting replaced by a guy who's in the NFL 11 hours ago. That sort of thing. So I applaud Dan Lanning for saying that, and other coaches have said that too. It's not just Dan Lanning. Here's the truth of this, and here's the bottom line. I don't care what the coaches' opinions are on this. I don't care what they have to say, frankly, because these are some of the same people that are in favor of a 24 college football playoff, and they're in favor of college football playoff expansion because it would help their resume look a little bit better, and it might guarantee them a little bit of job security. So in this instances, I'm not going to speak for every coach, but most coaches are not looking out for the overall health of the sport. They're looking out for themselves and what can help my team win football games. But also, it shouldn't be up to the coaches. The coaches shouldn't have a say in this, because the NCAA or whoever, I'm not relying on the NCAA for anything at this point, but the powers that be in college football should never even allow this to become a thing. And I actually had a conversation about this yesterday with a group of friends. I was saying what college football needs is a commissioner. Because if we're going to classify college athletics, if we're going to classify college football as professional sport because these athletes are getting paid millions of dollars, then shouldn't they have a commissioner like every other professional sports entity? Think about it this way. If you wanted to go to the NFL offices, there's a door, there's a building, there's an office that you can go to in New York. You can knock on the door and you can talk to the NFL commissioner. Now, there would probably be more steps that you'd have to go through, but you get what I'm trying to say. In college football, if you wanted to talk to the person in college football responsible for making all those decisions, well, you couldn't find that person because it doesn't exist. College football doesn't have a commissioner, and that's what the sport needs right now. They need somebody who, one, has the best interest of the sport at heart, and two, knows what they're doing. What we're seeing right now in this landscape is there are so many people who have their hands on the wheel that should not be there in the first place, but are only screwing up matters worse. And when I was having this conversation with a group of buddies, and we were talking about the NCAA, one of the biggest gripes that I had with this Senate bill that we talked about for so long was it would put the hands back in the power of the NCAA, back in the hands of the people that screwed it up so bad in the first place. And those people just need to get out of the way and get somebody in charge who actually knows what they're doing. Because the NCAA has had their chance. And they've proven that they can't handle that sort of responsibility. And they can't even go to court. They can't even enforce any of their rules. I'd really like to know their record in court. It's not good. I know that. They might be over because you have Louisiana state courts overruling them. You have Colorado state courts overruling them. It's just a mess. But bottom line is, it shouldn't be whether NFL players come back to college. That shouldn't be up to the coaches. That should be up to a person in charge of college football, and college football doesn't have that right now. To take a more positive approach, we have games this week. We have games this weekend, week 0. And when those games kick off, when North Carolina and TCU kick off in Dublin, Ireland at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning, we're not going to be thinking about this. And the following weekend, Labor Day weekend, when we have games on, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and we have Clemson and LSU, with games like that, week 2, Texas and Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, we're not going to be thinking about this stuff. But because there are no games going on right now, we're forced to talk about this stuff, and we're forced to shine a big, bright light on the ugly spots of college football. The truth is, I was reading some things on Twitter today, and a lot of people have, take a doom and gloom approach to college football. College football is going to be fine. There's a lot that I'd fix behind the scenes, at least. I wouldn't fix anything about Saturdays in the fall, but behind the scenes, when it comes to the transfer portal and it comes to NFL players coming back to college and it comes to NIL and that sort of thing, yeah, a lot of that stuff needs cleaned up. But what doesn't need cleaned up is Saturdays in the fall. And when we have games that are kicking off, when Georgia is at Alabama, when Ohio State is at Indiana, and it's 3rd and 10, and that crowd's at full throat, you're not going to be thinking about how much a left tackle is making in NIL. You're not going to be thinking about, well, did LSU try to bring this player back from the NFL? You're not going to be thinking about the Brennan Sorsby situation that we spent so much of our time talking about this offseason. We're not going to be focused on any of that because we'll have actual games to distract us. And I'm really excited to get to that point because there have been some times, not often, I caught myself and I'm like, man, I'm kind of a little down today. Why is that? I don't think why am I so sad? And my wife had to remind me, you just need football. We all just need football back in our lives. That's the truth. You don't need new friends. You don't need a job promotion. You don't need more money. You just need football. That's really all any of us need. So when the games kick off, we won't have anything to worry about. All right. Quick show today. And don't worry, we're going to have more to talk about tomorrow because we're going live again tomorrow too. And then we're going live again on Thursday. So plenty of time to preview week 0 matchups and all that good stuff, give you final notes you need to know heading into the weekend. We're going to wrap up here with some fall camp intel for the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, Brent Venables did recently receive a contract extension. I believe he's tied down through the early 2030s. I can't remember the exact year off the top of my head. But as long as Brent Venables is there, defense is never going to be an issue, or at least it shouldn't be. But if defense happens to be an issue, that's how you know something is seriously wrong. So as long as Brent Venables is there, I'm blindly going to trust the Oklahoma defense. The depth and the talent that they have at defensive line is among the very best in college football. A couple of names that you need to know along the interior of that defensive line: defensive tackle Jaden Jackson. You pair him with defensive tackle David Stone on the interior. Those are two legit NFL prospects that could both go in the top 100 of next year's NFL draft in 2027. So those are two names that you need to know. That defensive line rotation is going to be among the nastiest in college football. Just take my word for it. Now, depth at linebacker, they don't necessarily have the same depth at linebacker that they have on the defensive line. So, yes, if we were to nitpick concerns or maybe even just label them as question marks about the Oklahoma defense at this point in time, linebacker depth would be something that I would bring up, but depth is really a problem for a lot of teams across the country, not just Oklahoma. So I do like Kip Lewis. He's their one returning starter on the linebacking core. Big fan of Kip Lewis, really good player. Owen Heineke returns as well. Owen Heineke was not a starter last year, but he did play. So he returns for another season in Norman. The secondary, I trust to be good again this year. There's a good chance that they have a pair of brothers starting, and Peyton and Eli Bowen. A name that you need to know in the secondary. It's a fun name too. Reggie Powers III. That's a name that I've been hearing out of fall camp in Norman. They've found a specialized role for him too. They refer to this as the cheetah role. Basically, it's a hybrid defensive back that allows him to rush the passer. And in a recent scrimmage, Powers had 3 sacks. So you have a defensive back that is able to rush the passer. It's a dangerous combination. So Reggie Powers III is a name you need to know in that secondary for Oklahoma. Flipping over to the offense, John Mateer. He's fully healthy, ready to go for this season. Wasn't fully healthy last year. At least he wasn't for the last 10 games of the season, because I believe it was after the Michigan game in week 2 that he fractured or broke the thumb on his throwing hand on his right hand. He's fully healthy. You remember 2 years ago, John Mateer transferred over from Washington State, followed his offensive coordinator, who was at Washington State at the time, in Ben Arbuckle. So he's there again, another year in the system for John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle. Never had to really learn a new system in the first place once he got to Oklahoma, but it helps just the time spent on task in the same system. For receivers, Isaiah Satania III, stud. He's back. Led the team in receiving last year. 67 catches, 965 yards, 8 touchdowns, a true deep vertical threat. Parker Livingstone, a transfer from Texas. If I was ever elected college football commissioners, one of the first things that I would outlaw is transferring within the conference, within your own conference, but 2, transferring to a rival school. We have a kid, Parker Livingstone, transferring from Texas to Oklahoma. Crazy. But he's an experienced wide receiver, and he's added to the system as well. Trell Harris is another guy that I expect to start for Oklahoma, transfer from Virginia. 59 receptions for 847 yards and 5 touchdowns last season. A name that I'm hearing out of fall camp too, Manny Choice. Now, probably not going to be a starter. He'll be in the rotation. I'm sure he'll be included in the wide receiver rotation. But he's a sophomore at Oklahoma, a name that I just keep hearing about. For the offensive line, they have 2 returning starters from last year, including Michael Fusasi at left tackle, who I am infinitely high on. I believe can be in the upper echelon of left tackles, protecting the blind side of the quarterback in college football. Oklahoma had a very similar problem that too many teams in the SEC had that should never have that problem, including Alabama and LSU. Oklahoma was terrible at running the football last year. I thought they found a bright spot with Xavier Robinson towards the end of the season last year, but the run game has to improve. So you're taking a lot of pressure off of John Mateer, who, by the way, is a very capable runner, so that should help a little bit. But for Oklahoma, let's just look at the schedule here for Oklahoma. Oklahoma has one of the tougher schedules in the SEC this year. I'd say Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee has a really tough schedule. LSU, Ole Miss. When you add 9 conference games and then you throw in a 10th game against a Power 4 opponent, that's what you expect. But for Oklahoma, I feel like I can firmly pencil in 6 wins for them this year. Now, that's not saying they're going to win 6 games. I made my SEC record predictions and I had Oklahoma going 9-3. But when I say I'm penciling in wins for them, like 6 wins, I could easily say, like, okay, Oklahoma's winning that game. So for Oklahoma this year, they begin their season with UTEP in week 1. They're at Michigan in week 2. They have New Mexico in week 3. They're at Georgia. They have Texas in the Red River Shootout, referred to by no other name on this show. So just looking at that first 5-game stretch for Oklahoma, if things go haywire, Oklahoma could be 2-3 before Halloween. Now, I don't think that'll happen because Oklahoma won a lot of games that I didn't expect them to win last year, like going on the road at Alabama, going on the road in Knoxville, and beating Tennessee, 2 games that I actually picked the opponent to beat Oklahoma, and they just won a lot of games that I didn't expect them to win. But just looking at that first 5-game stretch, having at Michigan, at Georgia, and then Texas, which is a neutral site game, so not a home game for Oklahoma, that is a tough 5-game stretch. And if things go haywire, you might be looking at 2-3 before Halloween. You have Kentucky in there. You're at Mississippi State. You have South Carolina. You're at Florida in the Swamp. You have Ole Miss, Texas A&M, at Missouri. So it's a lighter back half of the season for Oklahoma, but you still have to go to Gainesville in the Swamp, which is, regardless of how good or bad Florida is, playing in the Swamp is always tough. And then you do Ole Miss and A&M. Those are going to be tough games. The good news is you get both of those at home. So I do have Oklahoma going 9-3, and the unfortunate reality for a lot of these SEC teams with the added boost and strength of schedule for all 16 teams in the conference, it's just hard for me to imagine a world in which these teams don't go throughout the entirety of the regular season without beating themselves up, beating each other up. Just total carnage in the SEC. And Oklahoma, I still think they're going to be really good. And Oklahoma's 9-3 compared to other teams 10-2 or even 11-1. Oklahoma's record, or at least resume, might look a lot better. But we'll just have to wait and see how things play out. That concludes the show for tonight. A little shorter than we're used to going, but we will be back tomorrow, same time, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel first and foremost. It really helps us out. Helps us out a ton on this show. This is a show built for the fans, built for you. We want to make this thing as big as possible. We want to make it as easily accessible as possible. And we just want to have a good time sitting back, kicking our feet up, talking college football. And we hope that we've done that at least through the first month and a half of the show. You guys have been great. Live viewership has been great. Channel analytics have been off the charts compared to what I thought they would be. Just continue to like and subscribe. And if you can't, you can always go back and listen later on podcasts. Make sure that you are subscribed on podcasts if that's how you choose to consume the show. We will be back tomorrow night, going to preview some games in week 0 because we have a 9-game slate that we need to talk about. Thank goodness that we have actual games on the docket that we get to talk about. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care. God bless. We'll talk again tomorrow.